Psalm reading, Psalm 72, first 7 verses. Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy and crush the oppressor. May he live while the sun endures and as long as the moon throughout all generations. May he be like rain that falls on the mown grass, like showers that water the earth. In his days may righteousness flourish and peace abound until the moon is no more. Then from the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians, first chapter beginning at verse 8, Paul writes, "We do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly, unbearably crushed that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, so that we would rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He who rescued us from so deadly a peril will continue to rescue us. On him we have set our hope that he will rescue us again, as you also join in helping us by your prayers, that many will give thanks on our behalf, the blessing granted to us through the prayers of many." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. For some reason, sports fans, this seems to be one of those big days I mentioned last week. I've seen people all week wearing these black and gold things. And there are signs in people's cars and little flags, and people wearing scarves and ties and stuff. You remember last week I spoke about the value of ordinary time, all the regular days in between the big days, and the ability of that ordinary time to develop our awareness and our better appreciation of big days. And if you look in terms of our Steelers season, maybe it was all those times during the regular season that helped build up the team to meet the challenges of this day. Maybe taking all those games into account will give us both perspective and encouragement that the team can find ways to win. While we remember, of course, that our personal worth is not dependent on the performance of a bunch of well-paid athletes. But what was left unsaid last week, I suppose, was just how to bank that time, so to speak. How to bank the time of ordinary days. How do we save up the experiences we have then to give us balance through the times of trial, or to buoy us in times of great joy? For a starting point, think again about that psalm I read. Unlike many others, this one wasn't part of the regular synagogue liturgy. Rather, it was a recitation prepared by the court poet to mark the coronation of a king. It's an expression of the hopes and the prayers of a people for a new reign. It's a wish that the ideal of justice and compassion in society will prevail under a God-fearing ruler. Did you note in listening to it how many verses started with the word may? May the king judge the people with righteousness. May the mountains yield prosperity. May he defend the cause of the poor. May he live while the sun shines. And so on. The psalm can be translated as a kind of wishful prayer, sort of like the call to worship we had from Psalm 20. The word may leads off many of those verses too. And if you think about our usual Sunday service, may those who are sick be comforted, we might hear in a prayer. May we be mindful of all your benefits, O God, as we receive the offering. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, a psalm prayer. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you, common benedictory prayer. It's a wish word, this May, which we use so often in addressing God. The psalm wishes for a good new beginning to a king's reign. So maybe on this third Sunday of the year, we might make a few connections to both our big days and our ordinary days through the gift of prayer. For some people, prayer is a little more than making a wish and has all the confidence of, well, some of you may remember a sportscaster named Joe Garagiola. Anyone remember him? We're going really far back here. Joe Garagiola was a former baseball sportscaster and Major League player. And he told the story of a fight once after a Pirates baseball game. And one bucko player had hold of one of his legs, and another one had his other leg. And Joe became alarmed when he heard someone say, "Make a wish." Maybe some of you used to pull apart the wishbone of a turkey. And maybe some of you remember it didn't work on Thanksgiving Day, not unless you had really cooked the turkey. You usually had to wait until the bone dried out, and then you snapped it, the person with the bigger part got his or her wish. Well, we have lots of rituals like this. When I grew up, when someone had a birthday and you put candles on the cake, the grown-ups would take their rings off and put it around a different candle and make a wish. And the idea was that if the birthday kid blew out your candle on the first puff, you got your wish. And you got to wick the icing off your ring. Others make wishes on the first star or planet they see, which worked for Pinocchio, you remember. Some people wish on rainbows, which helps if you're Kermit the Frog. Ritualistic wishing is fun. It opens the door of fantasy, and we can imagine all kinds of goodies we'd like to have waiting for us at the end of the rainbow, or in Fantasyland, or at the end of the Powerball. Prayer, in its simplest definition, is merely a wish turned heavenward, so said a prominent Christian writer. By heavenward, Phillips Brooks didn't mean wishing on a star. And nothing against stars, he's the guy that wrote "O Little Town of Bethlehem," "Out of thy deep and dreamless sleep the silent stars go by." Heavenward, though, was the usual imagery for God's dwelling place, which is where prayers went. Whole idea of sacrifices, and especially in ancient Israel, is that as the smell and the flames and the ash arose out of the fire consuming the offering, so it carried your prayers heavenward. The book of Psalms, 150 examples, contains all kinds of prayer, which, and Lamont for one, says can be classified as help, thanks, and wow. Some theologians, the ones who have entirely too much time on their hands, will go further and rank prayers, saying, for example, that asking for something for ourselves is not as good as just saying thanks, and even that somewhere below sheer praise. Well, whether or not petitionary prayer is the lowest kind of prayer, it's certainly the most interesting, and the kind most of us engage on. We pray to get something, like a better working liver, maybe. We pray to lose something, like 20 pounds. We wish for something to happen or not happen. As in, may I get over this cold, or may we have peace in our cities, or may the Steelers crush the life out of the infidels from Denver, or something along those lines. But prayer has to be more than just wishful thinking aimed up, asking God to make it so, perhaps, and then falling off to sleep. Prayer has to have something more to it than wishing on a bone, a candle, a star as a kid, and then just transferring that to God when we're adults. The difference between wishing on a star, a bone, or a candle and praying to God is that, unlike those more animate inanimate objects, we look to God as a causal agent. The context of real prayer, unlike wishful thinking, is that God can in fact change the course of events because we, and others, fervently wish it to be so. But such a blind transference of wishes to God can lead to trouble. A chaplain at the University of Notre Dame was once confronted by an angry fan after a football loss. The fan said, "Father, Notre Dame lost because you didn't pray hard enough." And reflecting on it later, the chaplain said, "Do people really think God is up there stacking Hail Marys in a pile? What do you suppose God does when we play Boston College? Compares the stacks, maybe?" Similar problem cropped up for a Lutheran pastor who tells a member of her church's youth group who asked me to pray that she makes the cheerleading team. I gulped, she said, put my hand on her shoulder and prayed that God would increase her confidence and help her to do her best at tryouts. Not exactly the prayer she had in mind, but it seemed a more fitting one. Prayer may or may not change God's mind on something, regardless of how hard we pray, even for the Steelers. But whether or not our prayers change God's mind at any given time, we can be positive that prayer can change us most of the time. Real prayer, and not just wishful thinking, looking heavenwards. Real, sincere prayer implies a quiet time to order our thoughts. Finding time for prayer is finding time to set the day in context, even if, maybe especially if, it's a very ordinary kind of day. Prayer changes us because it forces us to admit we're not in as full control of our lives as we'd like to think we are. If we stop for a second, it's no great leap of imagination to see how dependent we are on God and on each other. And real prayer helps us see how much we are a part of the answers to our own needs and desires. Which is why the dailiness of prayer is so important. We need the time to be changed. We need ordinary prayers of ordinary days to get, as Psalm 90 says, a heart of wisdom. And as we gain a heart of wisdom, we gain the perspective to deal with the high highs and the low lows of our lives. Not only that, it's in the daily practice of prayer that we begin or continue a conversation with God, so that when the days of testing come, we already know who we're talking to. Just after the end of World War II, the German pastor and theologian Helmut Thielicke was preaching to his congregation in Stuttgart. Their country was in ruins, and so was their church. Everyone there had lost loved ones, their homes, their means of support, their former way of life. The pastor stood by the altar of the bomb-scarred sanctuary wearing an abandoned pair of army boots and painfully looked out over the devastation. And then, of all things, he began to preach on the Lord's Prayer. And when he came to the phrase, "Thy kingdom come," he stopped and asked, how can these words have any meaning for us as we suffer in this dreadful condition? There was only silence. Pausing for a moment, he answered his own question. He said to the people that now they could understand the need for God's kingdom to come, for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. Understand better now than they ever could have before. Before, he said, our lives were safe, happy, well-ordered. They were somewhat platonic and a bit unreal. But now we see how deceptive the appearances were. Now the telephone wires are down, the hospitals and shops and transportation centers are bombed out. There is no food, there is no medicine. Now there is just us and God. While Teoka's words don't imply that we have to be bombed out, flooded, or hurricaned in order to make contact with God, we can see that in making daily prayers, we find a good starting place for a close relationship, just us and God. It's then we'll know how to ask, for what to ask, and better yet, we'll have a better idea of who we're talking to. Mind you, just because we have a conversation with God doesn't mean we get everything we ask for. Just because my daughter comes up to me and bats her eyes and says, "Please, Dad, can I please have this?" No matter how nicely she asks, she's going to get it. I mean, she's not going to get it right away. She'll get away. I'm going to talk next week about the kind of answers we get to prayer. Even so, the redemption of ordinary time is made possible by prayer. Martin Luther said, or he should have, even if he didn't, "I have such a busy day today, I need 3 extra hours in prayer." Prayer is in some ways the easiest of the spiritual disciplines, the easiest way to develop spiritual perspective, because it can be done almost anywhere and any time. It takes no special equipment, it can be done alone or in groups. But prayer is in some other ways the most challenging of spiritual disciplines, because once we begin to get into prayer, we almost always find there's more there than we thought. Alfred Lord Tennyson said, "More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of." There's no limit to the resources that come to us through prayer, because there's no limit to the God to whom we pray. Daily practice of prayer helps us bank those ordinary times. We bank those times getting to know God's love, getting to understand God's comfort, God's joy, and God's peace, so that when we really need these things, we can draw down on these ordinary experiences of prayer and get through. It's then, in the dailiness of prayer, we can learn the comfort and the strength of God to see us through dark valleys. The grace of God to enjoy the long view from the mountaintops. It's in asking God to be our vision each and every day that we will find insight into our world and the next. May God grant us wisdom and courage for the living of these days. Amen.